My name is Faisal Khan and I'm a lifelong supporter of Arsenal Football Club. Been a season ticket holder for many years, go to every home game, most away games. Sold programmes as a boy when I was a young kid at school, so my affiliation with the club is proper through and through, if you like. Kind of consumes my mind and my soul. It's something that I look out for on a daily basis. I'm always reading news, looking forward to games, thinking about games that have just come and gone. I've been immersed in football for years and years, playing football at school and being addicted to Premier League football and Arsenal in particular for a long time, thanks to my dad. And even now, mid-30s, father of a 1-year-old, it still consumes my mind and takes up so much of my time, to the annoyance of my wife, but it's a big part of my life and it's something that I don't think I could ever go without, so a serious part of my life. From a personal point of view, Arsenal is still a very special football club, always will be. I love the fact that we've got certain traditions, a big history and lots of values, and that stems from the manager obviously in charge and the way that we conduct ourselves in terms of on the pitch, off the pitch. I would agree that I think our reputation has been tainted because of recent shortcomings in seasons that have just gone by, and that's just the nature of football, James. The landscape has changed completely. The thirst for hunger, the thirst for success is immediate, and you need to be winning trophies kind of yesterday. So knowing that kind of expectations of modern fans, the football club's taken a bit of a bashing, but I'd still like to think that we're still thought of widely as an elite football club, doing things the right way. That's quite important to me, and that we've got a very good future ahead of us. I grew into Arsenal in the George Graham days. I remember them vividly. Anfield '89 was probably my first kind of like memories of Arsenal Football Club and celebrating those, and winning the European Cup Winners' Cup was an amazing time. But when Wenger came in, he was an unknown to fans, and he simply revolutionised the club. And some of the football that we played from the get-go, this kind of like swashbuckling, style, pace, power, everything about it, technically so gifted. It was just an incredible time to be associated with the club. From his first title to the FA Cups and then the Invincible season, it was just an amazing time to be an Arsenal fan, almost like a blessing. And it's a shame how it's kind of all changed in recent years and how we've gone through those barren years. And even though we've picked up recent FA Cups, our league campaigns haven't been so great. But in terms of the way that he's impacted me, he has given me the best memories of my Arsenal supporting life, and I will never forget that. On a personal note, I've had the pleasure of meeting him a few times, and he is an absolute gentleman. It is clear when you hear him talk not on camera, when he's talking at sort of AGMs and at other events, he talks so passionately and truly about Arsenal that you think he really cares about the club. He's genuine, he's very sincere. He has a lot of noble qualities. His resilience is phenomenal. Some would joke about it now, like he still thinks he's the best man for the job, and his resilience knows no bounds, and that's quite inspirational. So he's a legend. For me, probably the biggest legend to come out of the football club. I will always be grateful for everything that he's done, carrying us through those kind of like stadium years. And some of the football that I've seen under Arsene Wenger will probably be the best football that I ever see played by Arsenal Football Club. I think there's a lot to be said about a man's self-confidence, a man's determination to want to succeed, and I admire that. I think resilience is a great character, particularly at times of adversity. I can see why a lot of Arsenal fans and non-Arsenal fans would think that Arsene's probably a bit stubborn because, he could go. People question his commitment to the club, and people question his kind of like desire to be successful rather than just earning that handsome pay packet that he does. But for me, I think that's the sort of leader that you want at the club, someone who has that constant belief in knowing that even when times are tough, even when your backs are up against the wall, that he can pull you through. And as a player or as an employee of any organisation, you'd want someone with that ambition, with that drive. And so I think it's a really good thing. But I can understand why some people might consider it as stubbornness rather than resilience. Obviously, I'm just like any fan, really disappointed that we've not even competed. We've had a couple of seasons where we've come close, and yeah, it's 14 years, like you say, James, where we're not, going to win the league. And There are a number of reasons for that. First and foremost, the stadium. It's amazing how so many people kind of just dismiss it as an insignificant part of our history or an insignificant feat. Probably one of the most ambitious things that the football club has ever decided to do in its entire history. And it was a tough time for us. You know, we did it at the start of a global recession. We had to build the stadium in one of the most expensive cities in the world, and we were the pioneers almost. You know, one of the very first clubs in the Premier League to do so. So we didn't have a benchmark or a standard to kind of go against and learn from others' mistakes. We made the move, we had to make the move, and it was generally accepted that there would be some struggles as a result of making that move. Some of us really accepted that. Some of us got very frustrated by all of that. But we were always told that it would take a few years to generate the revenues that we were required to kind of compete. The biggest problem that we had, or the biggest challenge that we had that was probably unforeseen, was the birth of the clubs like Chelsea and Manchester City at the same time. You know, nobody could have anticipated their overnight riches. They've been stockpiling talent and buying endless, players, expensive players for years now. And we're just about beginning to start spending the 50 millions, the 40 millions, the 30 millions on players. And that's how far behind that we've come. So at the time when the club took the decision to move to the stadium, they'd obviously thought that United were the biggest competitors, and we probably could have managed that transition, and it may not have been 14 years without a trophy, without a title, sorry. But now that you've got serious competition with serious funding, it's just become that much more difficult. So I understand that. That said, in the last couple of years, the way that we've fallen away in the league is completely unacceptable. Whether you're Wenger in or Wenger out doesn't matter. Our league campaigns have been abysmal, and there are lots of reasons for that, and reasons that hopefully the club are looking to address now. But I would say that I'm quite sympathetic towards particularly Arsene Wenger, because I think that funding has been limited. Other clubs have just come out of the blue. Competition is much, much more fiercer, and there are probably just a number of reasons as to why we haven't won the league. Leicester City, what they achieved was phenomenal, incredible, unlikely to ever be repeated ever again. And it was a one-off. And people, when they say to me, well, Leicester City won it, well, would you swap your situation for Leicester City's situation looking back at 5, 10, 15 years? Probably not. What they did was amazing, and yes, it throws the money argument out the water, but they had a very, very unique year. Everything worked for them, everything clicked for them, and even though we finished second, we probably didn't deserve to finish runners-up in that year, and Tottenham messed it up on the final day. So yeah, of course, money doesn't come into it there. I think Claudio Ranieri did a phenomenal job, and like I say, everything kind of just clicked for them. Their players remained fit. They weren't in any other competitions that were maybe distracting them. That day when we beat Leicester and when Welbeck scored that last minute late injury time winner, I thought, this is it. We're gonna push on now. We're gonna propel and just go for that league title. But the manner in which we collapsed was it was so painful. It was humiliating as well as an Arsenal fan, because that hope after so many years of not competing, and you're thinking, right, Leicester City, that's it, that's all we've got all the other clubs are sort of fading away, the bigger clubs. And then to not win the league was massively disappointing. But it was a one-off, and you ask questions of Arsenal and Wenger, you have to ask questions of all the other big clubs that have spent even much more money than we had at that point. But that was a devastating blow, and then to lose to Watford, I think it was, in the FA Cup that year as well. That's when I kind of turned and said, you know what, I think Arsene's run out of ideas, and to come runners up to Leicester is worthy of the sack. But the board kept him on. They obviously believed that he could turn it around, and of course, went on to win the FA Cup, and here we are. It's been a really tough season. Like you say, the worst season under Arsene Wenger. League campaign has been painful. It's been abysmal to watch. Our football's not great. I think before yesterday, the Watford game, we'd lost 10 games in 29, or now we've lost 10 in 30. So we've lost a third of our league games, which is incredible if you think about it. Especially, the standards that Arsene has set himself. So that's been nothing short of embarrassing. The League Cup, I've personally always, accepted that it's not a major honour. So for us to get to the final was obviously a nice feeling. To get to the final and experience it out at Wembley was obviously great, until we'd gotten beaten by a very, very good team. But I'm not going to throw my toys out the pram, because it's always been that minor honour to me. It would have been nice to have won, but it doesn't really demonstrate any particular type of success for the club. You're right, we're playing Europa League football. That's also not nice. We get mocked for it endlessly, but we have a real chance of winning it. And if that's our way to get back into the Champions League, then, I'm hopeful. It'd be great to win that trophy, given that we've never won the UEFA Cup or its equivalent in our history. In terms of where we go, James, I still obviously love the club and I'm desperate for Arsene to turn it around. I think it's perfectly reasonable to think that a manager deserves a sack, but also to want the manager to kind of turn it around and end on a high. Obviously not so confident of that, but that's what I want. That's what the romantic within me says, that I think if Arsene Wenger does stay on, then the romantic in me kind of believes or wants to believe that he can turn it around and take us back to the top of English football. That would be the fairy tale ending, but at this current moment, doesn't look likely. Yeah, I mean, if you focus on the football side of things, not really much to be optimistic about at the moment. Like you say, the signings that we've made, for the first time in a few windows, we've started spending £50 million plus on players, and that's something Chelsea were doing over 10 years ago. So that shows the big gap, the kind of like what we're chasing. In terms of the changes that we've made off the pitch at sort of board level, I'm positively encouraged. I think it's an exciting time. I think the club need to start thinking about life post Arsene Wenger. But I don't necessarily think that these changes are about life post Arsene Wenger. I think they could be changes that have been made by Ivan Gazidis and co to help Arsene Wenger in his final year or years of his life at Arsenal. I mean, there's a lot of talk about Sanyehi coming in and Mislintat coming in to look after transfers and contracts renewals and stuff, and that's really welcome, because I think in recent years Arsene Wenger's kind of moved away from managing the football team to managing the football club, and I think that's taken a burden on him. And the older that he's got, he's just taking too much responsibility on, and he's only got shoulders of a certain breadth. So it's good if that kind of pressure's being taken off him, and if contract renewals and new players are going to be bought to help him, then I'm all for that. And in the longer term, Arsene Wenger does have to step away from Arsenal one day, and when that day comes, the club needs to be ready to help any new manager find his feet, and to help the club kind of maintain that position wherever we're in, and to try and make that transition seamless. And that's probably something that we're learning from the likes of Manchester United, at the likes of Chelsea. They replace their managers all the time, and they've already got those positions in the background doing that type of stuff. So it's really encouraging to kind of see those changes, and I think it's something that we've craved for a number of years. I'd like to think that Arsene Wenger would be given the opportunity to see out his contract, because as much as people laugh about it, there were times when he could have gone to other clubs, time when we needed him most, and he stuck with us. And I'm not the sort of supporter that will accept all his good times and will marvel in his good times, and then the moment things are a little bit dark for us, kind of turn my back on him and want to hound him out. I would understand if the club parted company with him if we don't win the Europa League and end the season the way things currently lie. But I'd like to think that the club would give him the opportunity to see out his last year, because that's what we stand for as a club. We have values and we have a lot of class, and we treat people the way we want to be treated ourselves. And Arsene Wenger's given us a lot over his time. He's dedicated his entire career. At the peak of his career, he could have moved to any club in the world, and he decided to stay, or he had to stay, depending on what you read and what you believe, but he did stay. Players walked out on us left, right and centre. Players, men that we idolised as fans, heroes, they came and they went, and he stayed, and he's been left to pick up all the pieces, and you can only kind of respect that. So I'd like to think that he'd stay and see out his contract. In terms of a new contract and years down the line, James, I think that depends on what happens next year. The ideal situation for me is that if we can somehow win the Europa League and finish the league as strong as possible, that salvages what would have been a disastrous season, and then next season we need to compete for the title. It's great to win FA Cups, great to get to finals of League Cups and progress in Europa League and whatnot and get back in the Champions League, but you need to compete for the league title. You need to be there or thereabouts, March or April, and if we can put in a serious challenge, or if we win it, then of course it's a different game altogether. So yeah, I think there is a future with Arsene Wenger in the short term. But in the longer term, there's a lot of factors. I don't know Stan on a personal level. Very few of us do. From what I see as an outsider, he seems like a very hands-off owner. He rarely attends games. I don't think he even attended the League Cup final. I know he's gone to FA Cup finals, but he kind of keeps a big distance from the club. He took a bit of money out in terms of the consultancy fees to KSE services, a couple of years ago, but that's kind of stopped. I don't know what relationship he has with the board. I can imagine that he obviously loves Arsene Wenger because we're performing at a certain level that's not causing too much headache for him. And I imagine there are some members of the board who probably want change in manager, change in direction, and maybe there's a bit of discrepancy there. But I don't know if he's a problem. The news that I'm privy to is that he is quite often open to spending money, but he has limited certain budgets in recent years that has not allowed us to pursue certain players, and maybe that's been to the detriment of Arsene Wenger and the team. But for me, I think the most important thing is that we hear more from the Kroenke family. Josh has been in town for the last 3 months, it seems, to try and get to know Arsenal a bit more. He's been a bit more involved in club activities, been much more present at ground level, and maybe he's the future. Maybe he's going to be the long-term future of the board and the Arsenal setup. But we need to hear from him. That's one of the most difficult things that the fans have at the minute. Ivan's really good at meeting fans and talking publicly about the club. Arsene Wenger likewise, but Stan never really talks. And so it'd be really refreshing to hear what his plans are for the club. And I think without knowing that, it's difficult to comment. And that's where all the frenzy just kind of comes from. People speculate, people read snippets, people read stories in the tabloids and the broadsheets, and they kind of get carried away with various conspiracy theories. But the reality is no one really knows what Kroenke's like. I don't know what his ambition is for the club, but it would be normal or reasonable to assume that he probably wants us to be successful, because more success for us means more money for him. So I'd like to hear from him. I think that's probably one of the biggest frustrations that I've got. You've got a silent owner who is just letting the club carry on as normal, but you never hear about his ambition or his drive or what he really wants. And maybe that'll be demonstrated when the managerial change is made. What sort of direction we go in. There's been an instance of a team he owns in America where he got rid of an experienced kind of veteran, if you like, and he brought in a young, almost unknown coach, and they've transformed completely. And whether Kroenke's into long-term vision or whether he wants that short-term change like Chelsea maybe, so that'd be quite interesting. But at the moment it's difficult to tell. In terms of how we're buying, it doesn't surprise me, because for years we were told that money would be tight, and for years we had to sell our best players. We had to make do with low value, low risk players in the market, picking up bargains here and there. That's always been the Arsenal way. The fact that we're spending 30, 40, 50 million pound plus players now is good to see, and it was to be expected, because Ivan always said that we'd get money from 2013, 2014. That'd be the year that our kind of turnover would shoot and be on par with the likes of Bayern Munich's, and we've started buying those players. But other clubs, richer clubs like we talked about before, have been buying these players for a long, long time, and so that gap is just beginning to narrow. In terms of individuals that you mention, I can't believe that the club is buying players without Arsene's consent. He's a manager that has full control over the club, has had full control over the club, from the way the dressing room has been designed to to contract renegotiations, to player purchases. I mean, he's been in charge of every little detail, so I can't imagine a situation where the club have suddenly just decided to, right, doesn't matter what Arsene thinks, let's just go out and buy these players. So I think these players are all down to him. I'm encouraged by the type of player we're getting. We're buying expensive players, we're buying established players. Aubameyang is a player, 28, 29, is at the right stage of his career. He will, supplement the likes of Mesut Ozil quite nicely, because, Mesut's getting to a certain stage where he's going to start peaking. I mean, it's amazing. He's entering his peak years, but he's such a phenomenal player. But, it's important that we went out and got that, rather than another youngster who we'd need to give 2 or 3 years to kind of, migrate into the team. At the time, I was gutted. Alexis, even though he was having a tough time sort of this season, and he looked a bit out of sorts and he looked a bit out of favour amongst his teammates, I still wanted Arsenal to keep him, because at the end of the day, as an individual, he's a phenomenal player. And if you get him on a good day, and if you play him in the right system, he could be incredible. It is, of course, amusing as an Arsenal fan to see him not, hit the ground running at United, but I think that's only a matter of time. And Mourinho's talked about how he's going to incorporate him into a new system next season. It's frustrating that the big clubs continue to almost bully Arsenal in terms of buying our talisman. To see Alexis go to Manchester United, it hurt at first. You saw the marketing launch of his signing, and it's painful to see it. But we got a great player in return, like you say. Henrik Mkhitaryan didn't have the best of times at Manchester United, but was a phenomenal player at Dortmund. And he has shown in the last couple of games glimpses of getting back to his best, and it will take a bit of time. And hopefully now we can just write off the rest of the season, give players like Mkhitaryan the time to really blend into the team, get to know his teammates, get to know the system, and then next season hopefully he'll hit the ground running. And that partnership with Aubameyang is something really to look forward to. So yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that at some point we're going to stop getting bullied by these big clubs. But contract negotiations, I mean, they're so complex. There's a number of, there's only so much control the club has. If a player really wants to leave and if a player really wants to stay in England, there's really not much you can do. And hopefully, seeing him go and being able to spend that money on somebody else and give wages to other players, hopefully that'll be better for us in the long term. But it's still painful nonetheless to see him put on that red shirt at Old Trafford. I think when you look at Arsene's qualities as a man, he's always treated everybody equally and fairly, and that's the whole implementation of this socialist wage structure, which basically meant that everyone was on a level playing field. At the time seemed like a very respectable thing to do, but obviously looking back, it's proved quite difficult to get rid of players because they've been on such high wages. The club has now moved to a structure where the best performers need to be paid the best money. And in terms of Mesut Ozil, 300, 350k a week, whatever it is, deserves every penny because he's a fantastic footballer. He's a big name and he's someone that you want at the club for the next 3, 4, 5 years. The likes of Jack and Aaron Ramsey, both players who I would love dearly to stay at Arsenal. And with Jack's situation, I mean, net terms it is going to be a slightly less offer than he's getting at the moment, but there's good reason for that. He's had a lot of injuries in his time at Arsenal and the club has stuck by him. And I believe any new offer is like a, sort of like a pay-as-you-stay fit type model. And if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. And, he can't come out on those wages that Mesut Ozil's on because he doesn't have the same impact in the team. He's not a regular or as regular as we'd like to see him. I don't think we've seen him play a season sort of 30 games more or, make 30 plus more appearances for us in the time that he's been at Arsenal apart from his first year. So he needs to really sort out his injury problems. And with Ramsey, great player, on his day, phenomenal, one of the best central midfielders possibly across European football, but sometimes a bit inconsistent. And again, if you want to command those wages, you need to be putting in those performances week in, week out. You need to show your worth. I'd like to think that both players will stay. I'd like to think that Arsenal will offer them better contracts. And I'm hopeful, I'm confident that they both will stay. But I do like the way that we've moved away from that socialist wage structure now to paying the best players the best money. That is the way the club should work. The rest of the team, the rest of the squad should look at those players and see that as inspiration. There's a time where Ainsley Maitland-Niles would have been paid 60k a week on his first contract years gone by, like the likes of Bentner and Denilson and all those sorts of players were put on hefty wages at the start. But now he's on a much lower salary as he climbs through the ranks and as he gets more experience and as he becomes a better, more influential player. Absolutely deserves that money. But the club's caught between a rock and a hard place, James, because any of these players that have that potential, if they're being paid slightly lower wages, their agents know that there are other clubs out there with lots and lots of money. So the club's in a tricky position where they know that Manchester City could offer Reiss Nelson a lot of money. And if Reiss Nelson's contract is up for expiry soon, then his agent's going to use that against Arsenal and say, well, look, we walk for free or you pay us the 60 grand a week, which he doesn't deserve. So it's a really tricky situation, but it's good to see the best performers get paid the best money, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm really encouraged by signing Aubameyang. Great player, goal machine in Germany. Hopefully he started well, like you say, James, in England in limited game time, and he's playing in a dysfunctional team at the moment. He's the right age, right profile, big name. So very happy with that. Excuse me. With regards to playing alongside Lacazette, that's something I'm really keen on seeing how that kind of works, maybe in a two with Mesut Ozil behind or Mkhitaryan kind of coming in off wide and supporting them. That's going to be really interesting and a dilemma for Arsene Wenger. In terms of the future, I mean, we had to buy Aubameyang because obviously we'd sold Sanchez, we'd sold Giroud, which I was surprised about, and we'd let Walcott go, which to be fair was probably the right decision. So we needed firepower, and I think the club knew that Lacazette would need some sort of surgery or some sort of care because he was carrying a bit of a knock for a while. So it would have been negligence to go into that, to end the January transfer window without having brought anyone in. So I'm really pleased, and if Aubameyang can just take the next 9-10 games that he's got left in this season, really get settled in the team, and then next season hopefully he'll become a world beater for us. I think the future looks bright for Arsenal Football Club. Arsene Wenger has been an amazing servant. The first few years were just mind-blowing, amazing experiences, some of the best experiences of my Arsenal supporting life, and equally the last few years have been painful. Watching a great club, a great team and a great man kind of like crumble and fall away and fade away has been really tough. He saved himself winning the FA Cups. He saved himself maybe by getting to a League Cup final and possibly winning the Europa League this year. I'd love to think that he could turn it around. I desperately want him to turn it around. That would be the fairy tale ending for him to maybe leave us at the top of English football, but it does look unlikely. But I think life after Arsene Wenger, James, is going to be really exciting. There's so many unknowns out there. Hopefully we make the right appointment. Lots of names being bandied about, lots of speculation that's going to come over the next few months, over the next couple of years. But we've got lots of reason to be hopeful, and that's obviously down to a lot of Arsene Wenger's work.